He calls himself a prophet, he promises wealth, he insists that anyone who follows him will become rich. But what if I told you that everything Prophet Todd Hall preaches about prosperity is built on a foundation of manipulation, theatrics, and carefully crafted illusions designed to keep people hoping while he keeps collecting? Because behind the flashy declarations, the electrifying stage presence, and the viral clips that flood social media lies a truth he desperately hopes you never examine too closely. A truth that explains why his prophecies cost followers more than they ever imagined, and why the spiritual lifeline he offers often becomes a financial noose. Today, we're pulling back the curtain and exposing what really happens when the story you've been fed is finally challenged. And by the time you reach the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why Todd Hall's words might be far more dangerous than they appear. Prophet Todd Hall has positioned himself as a bold, fearless voice promising abundance, prosperity, and divine elevation to anyone who follows his teachings, and on the surface, it sounds uplifting. A message coded in hope, faith, and the promise of breakthrough, but behind the stage lights and polished performance, countless followers quietly discovered that the reality is far more complicated, far more manipulative, and far more damaging than the public narrative ever admits. That is why today we're pushing past the emotional high of his sermons and digging into the inconsistencies, the patterns, and the cracks in his message that show why so many people now call him a liar. We'll examine his background, how he rose to prominence, the psychological strategies he uses that make his promises sound unavoidable, and the emotional and financial consequences people face after following his blueprint. You'll hear insider accounts, public reactions, and evidence that reveals the mechanics behind the prosperity machine he built. And by the end, it will be painfully clear why so many are questioning whether his prophetic authority was ever genuine at all. When you first encounter Prophet Todd Hall online, the energy is electric. He commands the room, he speaks with certainty, he tells you the one message struggling people all over the world crave: if you obey God, you will be rich. If you follow my instruction, you will prosper. If you sow, you will receive. For anyone crushed under financial stress or emotional pain or spiritual confusion, it feels like hope, like an escape route, like someone finally opening a door that life has slammed shut again and again. And Hall knows exactly how to frame his words to hit the deepest parts of a person's fear and desire. Flashy events, viral clips, testimonies of overnight miracles, declarations of sudden wealth, everything is packaged with precision, designed to make people believe that God is speaking directly to them through him. But hidden behind that inspiration is a condition he rarely states plainly. Obedience is measured in money, loyalty, attendance, and submission to the system he built. His message functions like a spiritual transaction. If you follow me, then God will bless you. If you give, then you will receive. And psychologically, that if-then framework is powerful, especially for people who are hurting. Former followers reveal the same pattern again and again. Big promises, emotional highs, extreme motivation to act, and then nothing. A few always seem to see results. Those stories are amplified, while many others fall deeper into financial strain, confusion, or guilt, believing they didn't apply the teachings correctly. It's a system that keeps people hopeful, keeps them spending, keeps them emotionally tied to him, while the blame for failure is shifted onto the followers' shoulders. And whenever someone starts to question the lack of results, Hall frames doubt as spiritual weakness, a lack of faith, or even rebellion against God, effectively silencing criticism before it can spread. To truly understand Prophet Todd Hall, you have to stop looking at the sermons and start looking at the system, the charisma that pulls people in, the psychology that keeps them committed, the financial structures that benefit him, and the subtle emotional manipulation that makes people believe the problem is always them and never him. This is where his influence becomes dangerous, because once someone is inside the system, questioning him feels like questioning God. And that is exactly how spiritual control works. Hall knows exactly how to captivate an audience, and whether he's commanding a packed auditorium, filming a high-energy video, or speaking directly into a live stream, he delivers every word with a confidence so polished and so rehearsed that it feels almost hypnotic, pulling people into the emotional gravity of his message until they're hanging on every syllable. Everything he says engineered not just to motivate, but to compel, to spark hope, urgency, and desire all at once. He doesn't simply promise money, he promises transformation, divine elevation, and the intoxicating feeling of being chosen, anointed, and destined for greatness. And once that seed is planted, he surrounds it with a marketing machine that amplifies every dramatic moment. His social media presence is carefully curated to highlight the most electrifying clips, testimonies of sudden wealth, emotional breakthroughs, shouts of praise, and crowds reacting like they're witnessing literal miracles unfold in front of them. Even someone scrolling mindlessly through Instagram or TikTok might pause, struck by the spectacle, because the spectacle is designed to feel supernatural, irresistible, and exhilarating. But behind the theatrical energy and perfectly edited clips lies a far more complicated, far more troubling reality that former insiders and critics have been trying to expose for years, revealing how many of the so-called miracles are exaggerated, selectively chosen, or framed in a way that hides the countless followers whose stories didn't end in breakthrough, but in disappointment, frustration, and often financial strain. The narrative is manipulated to ensure that success always appears tied to Hall's guidance, while the people who struggle simply vanish from the spotlight. And behind the scenes, there's a financial structure that funnels money upward through event tickets, donations, offerings, prophetic consultations, and teaching materials, all marketed as acts of faith, all framed as seeds that will return multiplied blessings. But the uncomfortable truth is that this system overwhelmingly enriches the prophet while offering inconsistent, unpredictable, and often non-existent returns for the followers who invest. Worse yet, the psychological effect on followers is profound because when the promises don't manifest, Hall doesn't take responsibility. Instead, he subtly shifts the blame onto the individual, implying their faith wasn't strong enough, their obedience wasn't complete enough, or their spiritual posture wasn't aligned enough. In this way, the cycle continues, devotion is intensified, accountability is minimized, and financial commitment becomes easier to demand. And yet, despite mounting criticism and more voices speaking out, Hall's influence only continues to grow because the allure of instant wealth, divine favor, and supernatural transformation is almost impossible to resist for people who are struggling financially, emotionally, or spiritually. The dream remains just close enough to touch, just believable enough to chase, and that dream keeps them coming back. One of the most dangerous elements of Hall's ministry is the way he promises wealth with absolute certainty, speaking as though God himself has personally guaranteed riches for anyone who follows his instructions. To someone facing hardship, the message doesn't sound manipulative. It sounds like rescue, like hope, like the breakthrough they've been desperately waiting for. But once you peel away the emotion, the cracks begin to show. Countless followers have shared stories of attending conferences, buying materials, sowing offerings, and giving sacrificially, only to end up in the same or even worse financial conditions than before. The emotional toll is devastating: shame, frustration, confusion, spiritual guilt. And Hall's response? He reframes those failures as tests, lessons, or signs of insufficient faith, shielding himself from accountability while keeping followers locked inside a loop of trying harder and giving more. This isn't accidental. Insiders reveal it's systematic. The teachings are structured so that failure strengthens the system rather than exposing it. Testimonies that fit the narrative are amplified, stories that don't are buried. And even though the cracks are visible to those who look closely, Hall continues attracting new audiences because the dream he sells is powerful, seductive, and emotionally intoxicating. In a world full of fear and uncertainty, he offers certainty. In a world full of hardship, he offers effortless abundance. And in a world where so many feel unseen, unheard, and undervalued, he offers the promise of being chosen. But the question that lingers beneath all the glitter is simple: chosen by God or chosen by a system that profits from belief? The allure of miraculous prosperity is undeniably powerful, and the dream Todd Hall sells becomes irresistible to anyone struggling financially, emotionally, or spiritually. People longing for relief, validation, and the reassurance that God sees their suffering and is ready to reward their faith with abundance. But just when the promises seem too good to be true, because they are, the stories of disillusioned followers, broken trust, and deep spiritual manipulation begin to surface like cracks beneath the glossy surface of his ministry, revealing why so many critics call Todd Hall a liar, and why his teachings raise unsettling questions about integrity, accountability, and the ethics of spiritual leadership in modern times. Behind the polished sermons, electrifying stage moments, and viral social media clips promising wealth, miracles, and instant transformation, lies a painful reality for countless followers who poured their time, money, and hearts into his ministry only to find themselves financially drained, spiritually exhausted, and overwhelmed with emotional turmoil. These stories, rarely shown in public, paint a devastating picture of unmet promises, internal battles, and a prophet whose charisma masks a system built on conditional blessing and ever-increasing demands. Former attendees describe giving thousands of dollars believing breakthroughs were guaranteed, attending event after event with the conviction that God would reward their sacrifice, and following strict faith steps prescribed by Hall. Yet when the promised miracles never materialized, they found themselves blamed rather than supported, told subtly and sometimes directly that their faith wasn't strong enough, their obedience wasn't complete enough, and their giving wasn't sacrificial enough. This psychological shift, moving responsibility away from the prophet and placing it entirely on the follower, creates a cycle that keeps people giving more, praying harder, and hoping longer, even as their finances crumble and their emotional health deteriorates. Many shared that the pressure to give didn't stop after the initial offering. Hall's teachings on sowing financial seeds often escalated into repeated pleas for more giving, framed as the only path to unlocking divine multiplication. And as followers fell deeper into financial strain, their emotional burden grew heavier. Shame, guilt, and feelings of inadequacy took root, convincing them they were spiritually defective rather than victims of a manipulative system. Families reported strained relationships, friends expressed concern, and yet many followers felt unable to walk away, fearing that leaving the ministry meant walking away from God's promised blessing. Meanwhile, the ministry amplified the rare success stories, the handful of testimonies where someone claimed sudden wealth or miraculous favor, while ignoring the overwhelming majority who saw no results. These selective narratives became the fuel that kept the prosperity machine running, creating the illusion that breakthroughs were common when insiders reveal they were statistically rare. This carefully crafted image of success forms what critics call the prosperity trap, where followers, seeing glimpses of victory on stage or online, believe their blessing is just around the corner, encouraging them to give even more despite mounting evidence that their sacrifice leads nowhere. Over time, the spiritual consequences deepen. Faith becomes transactional, worship becomes tied to financial outcomes, and the relationship with God becomes defined by reward rather than devotion. Just when it seems the emotional and financial damage is complete, a new layer of controversy emerges as watchdog groups, former insiders, and angry followers begin highlighting disturbing patterns, exaggerated claims, contradictions in teachings, false prophecies, and a glaring lack of transparency about where donations actually go. Social media posts exposing discrepancies go viral, sparking heated debates among believers and critics alike, leaving many who once defended Hall forced to confront uncomfortable truths about the man they trusted to guide their spiritual lives.